today marks the 178th anniversary of the murder and death of Kaspar Hauser, an important figure still not widely known outside of Germany and Central Europe. Those who are familiar with him will probably be due to the success of the film by Werner Herzog, The Enigma of Kaspar Hauser, which was released in 1974. Now, this film, however, did not offer a factual account, but instead offered a psychological treatment which introduced many people for the first time to the mysterious case of Kaspar Hauser, the 15-year-old boy found wandering the streets of Nuremberg in 1828, unable to speak or walk. Many thought he was mentally handicapped, but it would soon learnt that he had been imprisoned for 12 years in a cell devoid of light. He was chained to the floor, unable to stand up, and never had contact with another human being. Now, Herzog left the historical account of the crime aside and instead focused on the theme of the corruption of innocence.
Kaspar Hauser wurde auf dem Unschlittplatz in dieser Stadt, so wie hier steht, aufgefunden. In der rechten Hand ein Gebetbuch, hier in der linken der anonyme Brief.
Now, sadly, the research done by the great criminologist Feuerbach, who was the president of the Court of Appeal in Ansbach at the time, is given short shrift by Herzog. Feuerbach published a pamphlet which contained the results of his thorough investigation, in which he accused the royal house of Baden as being responsible for the crime, and also identified Kaspar Hauser as the rightful crown prince of Baden. Feuerbach was poisoned and died shortly after that was released. Now, many other investigators since that time have found new evidence that, again, identifies Kaspar Hauser as the rightful crown prince of Baden, as well as the role played by the royal houses of Baden and Bavaria in his imprisonment. Now, one of these researchers and investigators is Hermann, who spent 60 years studying all the relevant documents in this case, and then published them in 6 volumes. Now, the 7th and final volume, which was published in 1966, Hermann states that, "Now I believe that I have obtained such irrefutable circumstantial evidence of Kaspar Hauser's princely descent from the House of Baden that there can be hardly anything more conclusive in the case of successful dynastic crimes." Now, Fritz Klee in 1929 succeeded in identifying the changeling that was murdered in place of Kaspar Hauser as being a child from one of the servants of the Countess of Hochberg named Johann Ernst Jakob Blockmann. Now, this research and much else form the basis of the film Kaspar Hauser, Crime Against a Human Soul, directed by Peter Zehe, which was made in 1993. And despite winning a number of prominent German film industry awards, it took years before it was finally available to the English-speaking world. Now, it does not shy away in its chilling portrayal of the Countess of Hochberg orchestrating the kidnap of Kaspar Hauser as well as the murder of the changeling in order to have her own son, Leopold, be next in line for the throne.
Das ist also, unser Thronfolger. Die Hoffnung des Hauses Baden.
Jetzt mach schon voran.
Hier, auf dieser Tura lambdoidea.
Genau wie man den Hasen zu genicken pflegt.
Aber nicht zu hart, sonst ist er gleich hinüber.
Allee, Hannover. Worauf wartet er noch?
However, 2 years later, Der Spiegel, Germany's biggest selling weekly magazine, published the results of a DNA blood analysis which it had commissioned in an article titled The Loveliest Crime Thriller of All Time, and claimed that based on a DNA comparison between blood taken from the underpants supposedly belonging to Kaspar Hauser and 2 living relatives of Stephanie de Beauharnais, Kaspar's alleged mother, that it was proven beyond all doubt that Kaspar was not related to the royal house of Baden, and this was just a silly conspiracy theory and fairy tale that the German people have believed in for far too long and should simply stop believing in it. Now, in 2002, an independent documentary produced by the production company Caligari Film called Mordfall Kaspar Hauser, The Murder Case of Kaspar Hauser, commissioned an independent DNA test which used multiple skin and hair samples taken from Kaspar Hauser, as well as blood taken from Astrid von Medinger, a descendant of Stephanie de Beauharnais, at the Institute of Forensic Medicine at the University of Munster. And this was carried out under the expertise of Professor Dr. Bert Brinkmann, who, contrary to Der Spiegel test, found a 95% match between the two samples, the same except for a single marker which could have occurred due to mutation in the female line. And he concluded by saying it would be absolutely unscientific and false at the present time to rule out Kaspar Hauser as possible Crown Prince of Baden. And more importantly, this proved that the Der Spiegel test falsified evidence in order to present these findings that he was not the Crown Prince of Baden. So 178 years later, Kaspar Hauser and his tragic destiny is still of more controversy and debate than ever before. And to discuss why this is the case, joining us live from Stourbridge, England, is author of the book, Kaspar Hauser, Where Did He Come From?, available through Whinstone Press, Terry Boardman. Terry, welcome to ASM and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Elliot. It's good to be here.
Now, Terry, the second DNA test carried out by Dr. Brinkmann clearly proves that Der Spiegel's was fraudulent. Why would it be worth Der Spiegel falsifying DNA evidence in order to have the German people stop believing in Kaspar Hauser as Crown Prince of Baden?
Well, I think there are basically two aspects to this. There's what you might call the universal aspect, and then the German national aspect. The German national aspect, we deal with that first. I think this is really about history and has to do with the feeling of many German people that their history, say from 1848, from the revolution 1848 to 1948, this whole period was, so disastrous, and that they are in many respects seeking to look for an alternative explanation as to why things went wrong, different from perhaps the explanations that have been given so far. And there's a certain group of people, you might say, who are interested in no alternatives being presented, so that the usual alternative, namely that the Germans were responsible for both world wars and there is something particularly wrong with Germany, that this explanation should go on. Whereas the idea that Kaspar Hauser was the rightful Crown Prince of Baden is important because it explains that if he had then been the Prince of Baden in 1848, for example, at the time of the German Revolution, then he might have ended up as the King of a United Germany. And if he had ended up as a King of a United Germany, then, of course, the whole history of Germany, Central Europe, and, of course, arguably the world, well, not arguably, actually, but the world would have been very, very different in the 20th century. So I think that's really the nub of it. But then, in addition to that, there's the more universal question about Kaspar Hauser, the being of this young child at first, and then boy, youth, who was a very innocent soul, you might say, being in effect destroyed in particularly foul manner, and this has, I think, this is very significant universal appeal beyond the German national question. And so that's another aspect to the whole story. I mean, some people have even said it's almost like a kind of a Christ-like destiny that he had. But as far as the Germans are concerned, it has to do with the truth about their history and an alternative explanation for that. and then the effort from another side, and a more elite, hidden side, you might say, to obscure that truth.
If Kaspar Hauser had not been assassinated and come to assume his rightful role as Crown Prince of Baden, what might have happened differently for the history of Germany and Central Europe?
Well, you see, I think, for example, the Austrian spiritual scientist Rudolf Steiner pointed out that what could have happened in the 19th century would have been for a cooperation between Bismarck, who's well known, Ferdinand Lassalle, who's maybe less well known. He was a Prussian Jewish trade union and social democrat, the founder of the Social Democrat Party in Germany, and a very charismatic political leader, social reformer. And then also Kaspar Hauser, if he'd been, as I say, Prince of United Germany. And if Steiner's point was that these three would actually have been able to collaborate for the sake of Germany. And this might seem bizarre to some people because obviously they know about Bismarck, the man of blood and iron, so-called. Yeah? But the point here is that whereas Bismarck was certainly a man of will, and whereas Ferdinand Lassalle was a man of feeling and imagination, you might say, social imagination, social initiative, Kaspar Hauser was a person both of social initiative, but also he had certain moral and spiritual qualities. And these three would have been able to collaborate in such a way that, as I say, the destiny of Germany would have been very different. However, Kaspar Hauser was murdered in 1833. Ferdinand Lassalle died in a rather stupid duel over a woman. Again, that's rather symptomatic, you see, because it was a romantic affair over a question of feeling and honor. So he died in 1864 over this woman, and that left Germany only with the man of will, Bismarck. So you had the will element, which did not have what you might call the spiritual, idealistic, or thinking element, and the political feeling element to guide it. So Germany was just left with a one-sided direction when Bismarck took over. In fact, the first of the wars which brought him really to great power in the new Germany took place in the very year that Ferdinand Lassalle died in 1864.
And finally, Terry, despite being murdered almost 180 years ago, why do you think he is still of such interest today and the focus of more and more books, movies, and even has festivals dedicated to him?
Well, as I say, first of all, there's the universal aspect of that. You know, you get people like the North American singer. I can't remember whether she's Canadian or originally or American now. Suzanne Vega. She put out a fairly well-known song, Kaspar Hauser, about Kaspar Hauser in the 1980s. There's even a Californian drama group named after Kaspar Hauser. There's German punk bands named after Kaspar Hauser. There's all kinds of things, as you say, named after Kaspar Hauser. And this partly has to do with the fact that many people, when they get to hear about this story, something strikes them at a very deep level. And it has to do with this question of a being who, on the one hand, seems to have something in his character which speaks to us from the very ancient past. And he was recognized by his contemporaries in Nuremberg, where he appeared in 1828, as having something of a paradisal, almost archetypal character from before the fall, some people felt. Yeah. But on the other hand, other people recognize something in him of qualities which we'll need in the future. Qualities in relation to nature, in relation to animals, in relation to his fellow human beings, his community spirit, and so on. And so when people see how this was destroyed by the materialism, by the nature of the social milieu of his time, it speaks on this very universal level of the destruction of innocence, you might say. And he was also destroyed, so to speak, or attacked and undermined and destroyed, eventually murdered, in a way which sums up many of the evils which we have got used to in modern times, you know, which is not only physical violence, but also, for example, the discrediting of his name and his memory, so sort of, character assassination, we call it now. Yeah?
Okay, sadly, that's all we have time for, Terry. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Elias.